Hello everyone, welcome to the 200 Literary and Jury Charge. We're going to start off with an excerpt from Don't Sweat the Small Stuff, and this is called Imagine the People in Your Life as Tiny Infants and as 100-year-old adults. Here we go, ready? I learned this technique almost 20 years ago. It has proven to be extremely successful for releasing feelings of irritation toward other people. Think of someone who truly irritates you, who makes you feel angry. Now close your eyes and try to imagine this person as a tiny infant. See their tiny little features and their innocent little eyes. Know that babies can't help but make mistakes, and each of us was at one time a little infant. Now roll forward the clock 100 years. See the same person as a very old person who is about to die. Look at their worn-out eyes and their soft smile, which suggest a bit of wisdom and the admission of mistakes made. Know that each of us will be 100 years old, alive or dead, before too many decades go by. You can play with this technique and alter it in many ways. It almost always provides the user with some needed perspective and compassion. If your goal, or if our goal, is to become more peaceful and loving, we certainly don't want to harbor negativity toward others. All right. I'm going to read a story called White Knuckles Over Niagara. All right, here we go. Funambulist. Oh, how Harry Colcord rued the day he'd meet one. Eager to horn into the wages of fame, Colcord now feared he had sold his young life to Mr. Blondin, a famous funambulist, high-wired acrobat. Harry M. Colcord was no daredevil or athlete, but a slightly built white-collar clerk and agent who slid along on a smile, a handshake, and a shoe shine, selling his product, the Great Blondin. But on this day, August 17, 1859, Harry stood unwillingly as point man in a crowd crowning the cliffs on the Canadian side of the Niagara Gorge below the falls. Trembling and pale, he subdued an clamoring impulse to run away as fast as he could. Harry's frightened eyes were presently engaged with Blondin's friendly, encouraging eyes as the slim, muscular aerialist, carrying a long balancing rope, strolled up the final length of the rope pathway, stretched 1,100 feet across the wild river of the Niagara, 190 feet below. Blondin's saunter from the United States side had been accented with a few circus-type stunts from his repertoire. The 3-inch braided rope swayed in the wind currents of the gorge behind the nonchalant daredevil. Harry felt sick, for it had been advertised that in half an hour he would ride on Blondin's back across the fearsome chasm. Blondin was an appropriate stage name for the Frenchman, Jean Gravelet. He was fair, blue-eyed, and light-haired. Blondin was 35 and had been in the United States 4 years with a troupe of acrobats employed by master showman P.T. Barnum. In 1858, Blondin visited Niagara Falls as a tourist. It was there that he conceived a dream of slinging a rope pathway between the two countries over the Niagara Gorge. In the spring of 1859, Blondin left Barnum and with Colcord came to Niagara Falls, determined to create a personal aerialist theater. Getting tying rights on both shores was difficult and required the hefty sharing of profits. However, a public-spirited merchant agreed to provide the thick, expensive rope for free. He even winked kindly when he said that if Blondin changed his mind and never used the rope, he would understand. Installed and anchored at either end by wide-spaced ropes, the heavy strand sagged about 20 feet in the middle of the span. Since the gorge is normally windy, the rope moved sluggishly sideways and up and down. A huge crowd with mixed emotions of hope and fear was present on June 30th, 1859, to witness Blondin's historic walk. Stepping out at 5 p.m., clothed in silk tights, Blondin revealed early on that he was a showman, not just a hiker. A quarter of the way out, Blondin stopped, yawned, and stretched before lying down on the rope and placing the 38-foot balancing pole across his chest. He even appeared to snooze for a few minutes. Neatly arising, not using his hands, Blondin casually ambled out to midpoint, pausing on the swaying strand to unroll a coil of thin, lead-tipped rope. He patiently dangled the rope 180 feet down to a waiting boat where a small bottle was attached. The daredevil reeled the rope back, sat down, and took a drink. Resuming his journey toward Canada, Blondin abruptly performed a backflip somersault, raising the tempos of many hearts throughout the crowd. Then he ran lightly up the mooring as the applause from both banks momentarily suppressed the roar of the Niagara Falls. The great Blondin announced that he'd walk back too. Carrying a camera, he went out and tied his pole to the rope. Freestanding in perfect rhythm with the rocking footing, he took pictures like an airborne tourist. He then briskly walked to the American side. Blondin soon reappeared with a chair that he balanced on the rope and stood on. After that, he called it a day. Blondin went on to cross the falls weekly, adding new stunts. All of his crossings were heavily publicized by Colcord. On July 4, Blondin crossed in a heavy sack of blankets, blindly feeling his way. On his return, he walked backward. He bicycled. Once he came out pushing a wheelbarrow, bearing a small stove. In midair, Blondin fired the stove and prepared, cooked, and ate an omelet. At least once he stood on his head on the rope. The great man crossed at night with Roman candles spouting from his pole tips to mark his progress. A locomotive headlight shining on the rope went dark as Blondin was en route, but it is likely that this had been arranged by the canny daredevil, who emerged unfazed. The business of daredeviltry requires the addition of new thrills, mostly because the crowds demand it. In early August, Blondin told Colcord, "Harry, here's a stunt that will complete our fortunes. I'll find a man and carry him over." Harry also thought it was a great idea and advertised a princely sum for the person who completed the trip on Blondin's back. There were several suitable applicants, but after looking at the swirling depths of the gorge, each one quietly walked away. Then Blondin proposed, "Harry, you're a small man like myself. I can carry you. Be a good fellow and come along." Harry blushed and stammered. He couldn't say yes or no, but at a meeting of the Star and his agent with the press, Blondin cheerfully announced that he would carry his friend Harry Colcord on his return from Canada on August 17th. The news caused a sensation. It was apparent that a big crowd would come. Harry was hooked, wiggle as he might. On August 17th, after landing on the Canadian side, Blondin realized that Colcord was in a state of terror, hardly responding to him, staring into the gorge, where the rolling water sped by at 42 miles per hour. So Blondin firmly took hold and led his companion out to the brink beside the rope as about 100,000 people called encouragement. In a daze, Harry M. Colcord, apprentice daredevil, mounted on Blondin's back, wrapped his arms around Blondin's neck, and placed his feet into harnessed stirrups. It was a load. Colcord weighed a little less than Blondin, 136 pounds. The balancing pole added about 40 more pounds. As Blondin walked out, Colcord tightened his embrace. As Blondin barely grunted to release his grip, Harry, by supreme will, obeyed. Harry remembered the moment. Out over that horrible gulf, I heard the roar of the water below and the hum which ran through the crowd. As we cleared the brink, the hum ceased. The strain had spread to them. Blondin walked on steadily, pausing for one brief moment at each point where the guy ropes joined the main cable. The line was a trifle steadier at these points. Blondin halted at the last resting point before the middle span and yelled above the roar of water and wind, "Harry, You are no longer Colcord, you are Blondin. Until I clear this place, be a part of me, mind, body, and soul. If I sway, you sway with me. Do not attempt to do any balancing yourself. If you do, we shall both go down to our death. As the rope really moved, onlookers saw that the pole tips, which usually moved slowly, were now whipping up and down like the wings of a bird in rapid flight, and Harry thought they swayed sideways with the river flow. Blondin was now running just as a boy runs in order the better to keep his balance when walking on a railroad track. We were nearing the point where the joining race of the first sky line from the opposite shore offered us a breathing space. Finally, Blondin's foot was planted on the knot that joined the lines. It was sucking in some air when suddenly the rope was jerked from beneath Blondin's feet. The pair, near the end, managed to maintain their balance. Blondin was wringing wet with sweat, almost done in. Ashore, hundreds reached out their hands. The bandsmen were too emotionally overcome to hold a tune as their dogged pair rushed the crowd on American soil. During the wild celebrations that followed, the president of the New York Central Railroad hailed the heroes. He gave Colcord a $1,000 check. Then the president offered the finest gesture a railroad baron could make. With a twinkle in his eyes, he presented a second $1,000 check if Harry would promise not to do it again. Harry eagerly accepted. What a happy ending. Can you imagine? I sure couldn't. All right. I'm going to read some literary to you. Okay. Actually, this is going to be jury charge. Okay. All right. Here we go. Thank you very much, Your Honor. Now, members of the jury, and actually I said this was going to be jury charge. This is actually going to be legal opinion and arguments. Okay? All right, here we go. Thank you very much, Your Honor. I'd like to first advise the court that what is at stake on this discovery motion is not simply categories of documents, some 60 questions involved in Penwell's deposition. I'd like the court to know that there are 5 depositions and 5 document productions of requests for document productions, which are pending at this time in this litigation, awaiting the outcome of the court's ruling on this particular motion, specifically the deposition of the president, Coast Federal, Mr. Blakely, Executive Vice President, Mr. Martin, and 3 other executives or officers, Van Zost, McNair, and Stemler. I submit to the court if Huntington Center is wrong about the relevancy of all of these collateral matters, which they inquired into of Mr. Powell. I think all of this information is a colossal waste of money and time on themselves and on these other 5 Coast officers. Mr. Penwell's deposition consumed 4 days. 350 pages, which I hold in my hand, are the product of the first 3 days. The 4th day, which was on April 1st, has not even been transcribed, so that this is the dimension of the kind of discovery which the court is being asked to permit here with respect to documents requested for the purpose of ascertaining the intent of Coast Federal at the time that the lease was entered into in 2003. First of all, Coast Federal was not even involved in the lease transaction. One of its predecessors, Southern Federal Savings and Loan, was. There could be documents still in Coast Federal's possession as a result of acquiring Southern Federal by merger. The problem here is they never really tell us what particular intent they are after as far as the requested document production. The lease provisions that we are concerned with here are pretty standard boilerplate kind of provisions. First, there is a standard covenant against subleasing and assignment without the leaser's consent. That is article number 15. We have article number 34, which says the leaser, whenever its consent is required, shall not unreasonably withhold its consent. Now, what conceivable parole evidence, Your Honor, would be introduced to give some peculiar kind of interpretation to these provisions? As the court can see, there is a boilerplate printed lease produced and propounded by Huntington Center in 2005. I don't see what all the documentation with respect to the negotiation of this lease is going to prove and how that is going to resolve specifically the dispute which is before the court, which is the validity of this sublease transaction. The issues are, you have these two standard provisions, and what you do is you look at the conduct of the parties with respect to the request subleasing. The fact is, Coast Federal made the request in May. All right, what ensued thereafter with respect to assessments of the reliability and responsibility of the proposed subtenant and the conduct of both Coast and Huntington Center, which bear on the issue of the waiver and the good faith, the estoppel. The point is, Your Honor, I don't believe that by any stretch of the imagination it is relevant to go back to 2005 when this lease was executed and started getting into everything that happened at that particular point in time. Now, with respect to the other requested discovery, both from the standpoint of documentation and the 60 questions which are the subject of this motion, the sole justification as I see it for all of this requested discovery is that the allegation Coast's conduct was motivated by particular anti-competitive desires, and that this somehow is relevant to the determination of this dispute, the validity of this sublease to Leo's Stereo. What Huntington Center is trying to do here, Your Honor, is to place an issue in question of what Coast's motivation precisely was when it asked Huntington Center for permission to take this sublease transaction. Specifically, they want to know what Coast's motivation was in moving out of the Huntington Center and to relocate its branch office elsewhere in the center, and secondly, what its motivation was in wanting to sublease this property to Leo Stereo, which admittedly is a non-savings and loan association subtenant. Coast submits that this issue of motivation is really not an issue and cannot be an issue in this case. It is a false issue. It is a non-issue in all the following respects. First, Your Honor, with respect to the concept of a business moving from location A to location B in order to improve its business, that to me, inherently by definition, is not anti-competitive. It is competitive. The business is trying to improve itself, trying to compete better with its direct competitors in the area. There is nothing wrong and illegal about that. I can't see anything wrongful and illegal about a business, any business, not just the savings and loan business, wanting to move to a better location. What conceivably is anti-competitive about that? Secondly, let's assume for the purpose of argument that a business in location, say 91 Huntington Center, with the right under the lease provisions to sublet with the landlord's agreement not to unreasonably withhold consent is motivated after it moves out to a better location, not to sublet to one of its direct competitors. I submit again, Your Honor, there is nothing wrongful. There is nothing illegal about that motivation, whether that is an only motivation or whether that is just a part of their motivation. Okay, I'm going to stop there. I've got a story here, a summary of the life of Martin Luther King Jr. We only have a few more minutes, so we're going to start on this and then I'll continue it in the next class. Ready? Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929 and died on April 4th, 1968. He was an American pastor, activist, humanitarian, and leader in the African American civil rights movement. He is best known for his role in the advancement of civil rights using non-violent civil disobedience based on his Christian beliefs. Born Michael King, his father changed his name in honor of German reformer Martin Luther. A Baptist minister, King became a civil rights activist early in his career. He led the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott and helped found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or otherwise known as SCLC, in 1957, serving as its first president. With the SCLC, King led an unsuccessful struggle against segregation in Albany, Georgia in 1962, and organized nonviolent protest in Birmingham, Alabama that attracted national attention following television news coverage of the brutal police response. King also helped to organize the 1963 March on Washington, where he delivered his I Have a Dream speech. There he established his reputation as one of the greatest orators in American history. On October 4th, 1964, King received the Nobel Peace Prize for combating racial inequality through nonviolence. In 1965, he and the SCLC helped to organize the Selma to Montgomery marches, and the following year he took the movement north to Chicago. In the final years of his life, King expanded his focus to include poverty and the Vietnam War. In 1968, King was planning a national occupation of Washington, D.C. to be called the Poor People's Campaign when he was assassinated by James Earl Ray on April 4th in Memphis, Tennessee. His death was followed by riots in many U.S. cities. Okay, I'm going to stop there, and I will finish that in our next class. And that concludes the literary and jury charge for the 200 class. Have a great day.